Hello again and welcome to the program. I am Suren. Just wondering about my own childhood days. Starting from my infant years, I still think that I was, even then, a dreamer. Even perhaps born to be a forever dreamer. What was I dreaming? Hallucinating? Or just imagining? One might curiously ask. To tell you the truth, I am unsure. Remembering what we are being told, that at that age we don't have any memories that we could match our dreams and imaginings with them. In the light of our last discussion we had, I further concentrated on my own experiences as I have documented in my autobiography written in fantasy style. Well, I had to present it in a fantasy style because of my, shall we say, unusual imaginings and dreams as I classified them a while ago. But you may desire to call them as my childhood experiences. Appear to me like fantasy or even science fiction. By presenting them in that light, I could get away with presenting what was true to me as a fantasy, and which would be readily acceptable by the general public. If I would, however, present them as reality, then I would be considered as if under a very unfortunate light, perhaps being considered as unstable in the mind. In fact, some did so. My parents, even my cousins have considered me as a young boy whose head was above the clouds, always dreaming, always fantasizing, always imagining things. I have certainly documented some of my experiences quite nicely using my imaginative mind and my memories of past dreams and experiences which people generally would consider as simple imaginations or dreams of a young boy. Ever since I was a little younger than 2 years old, and further, I always thought of being guided into an unusual city of lights and encouraged to enter a tubular structure with green fluidic material. Then experiencing suddenly my being born into an earthian life. Then in my early primary school days, having discovered some unusual lights coming from through the cobblestones on the road surface, full of potholes, as my curiosity awakened to know what was happening inside. And when spoken to my mother and others, having been laughed at that I was only imagining, and which I have taken definitely as real. However, as determined as I was, coming back from school, one day my new discovery of the same lights which were beautiful purple incandescent type from the ground, weather was being truly nice, and There were not many people around to be seen. I was holding a thin stick, a little branch of a tree, and pushing it inside one of those openings to see what happened. Feeling a cool breeze on my hands and hearing a strange but a pleasant voice in my head saying, "Little boy, don't be afraid of us. If you want, you can come in. We can talk a little and then you can go home." Feeling so much apprehensive but happy with the friendly invitation, I was somehow admitted in. I have been shown things which I have never seen ever in my then and current world. Such things as what we call the color 3D monitors showing different worlds, stars and star clusters, planets and moons, etc. in those days. By that time, I had never seen anything like those things shown and spoken to me. My young mind could not comprehend all the concepts of what they were knowledgeable of and could talk to me about in very simple terms for me to understand them easily, I suppose. However, as I grew older and became more mature, I have discovered a lot more how truthful they were. They showed me the moon as it was long before the Americans went to moon. That is, if that moon landing was real. And true, long before my invention of a simple cardboard telescope using our grandmother's glasses and seeing the moon as it was then, together with my brother, in reality from our backyard. We'd return her glasses back later. I was so keenly interested in stars, planets, and space, as well as traveling into space as a child and later as a teenager. I could indeed visualize myself traveling into places distant easily, soaring, floating amongst the stars, going to places and to planets like Mars, which I didn't know as being known to be Mars, or maybe a different planet, or maybe a different existence. That is the story of my childhood. I could only consider it all a hallucination, or even now, just imagination. But then it was, to my young mind, most unusual, very strange and very unbelievable, yet very real. Forever asking how it was possible to hallucinate, or let alone imagine, without any reference point or any memory of any kind previously. When only a few weeks old, I could not even consider of hearing and comprehending a story told to me while I was too young and just beginning to distinguish the faces of people. It was a time when everything was a blur, a time to get accustomed to the world I was born into. So we are told anyway. Ever since that time of my life and throughout my schooling days and further, I have encountered very unusual people whom I cannot fully describe. Spoken to and gained some knowledge of them and from them, apart from the books I have borrowed from the libraries and from my efforts when I was in high school level of education, when I used also to borrow film projectors and films about space, rockets, and space travel technologies, and so my interest was growing and growing further about the first dwellers on planet Earth and their achievements before their demise for the current humanity's introduction. I searched into libraries and discovered several books on history and archaeology, and some of which were supported by my history teachers as well. I learned all about ancient history of Gilgamesh and the ancient travelers, the ancient gods of Sumerians and Mesopotamians, and in their book of creation called Enuma Elish, where I read their version of the creation story, which is being partially copied by the Genesis, the first book of the known Bible. However, what I discovered and learned about was not enough, as I needed to discover in time and really learn all about them. There was indeed so much more to learn. However, that book made more sense when reading the story of creation than the Bible version of it. Was I perhaps an abnormal youth? I studied hard and achieved what I needed to achieve and lectured for many years, learned different languages, discovered more about new cultures and the ancient ones. I still ask, was I abnormal? Did I belong here? Was I from elsewhere? I certainly was different, and quickly learned never to make the mistake of mentioning of it to anyone. One interesting phenomenon happened to my life wherever I went. For example, when I was in Turkey or in Europe, in Germany particularly, and everywhere and anywhere I have been to, where I have been almost always considered a foreigner, not belonging here. I've been also told so many times to go back to where I originated from, and that didn't make any sense at all. Especially my belonging to a different race was taken very seriously. For instance, in Ankara, I was called an Armenian dog, and in Germany, I became a stupid and dirty Turk. In both, I have been ardently advised to go back to where I came from. Where did I come from? I studied clinical psychology and psychiatry, learned to find details of these sciences. I tested myself and have been tested by many means throughout the years, and nothing extraordinary or unusual has been discovered about me, and yet I still consider myself as different because I was born probably only hallucinating, as I was oft told, and only dreaming, only imagining. That was a time when I met and was introduced to people like George Adamski, who claimed to have been taken for a tour of our solar system in a flying saucer, and has met people from different recesses of the galaxy and was living in California, USA. I used purposely a different name to communicate with him when I was still in Turkey. If you ask me, why was I interested in this? Why In the first place, I was only interested in stars and space travel and going to different galactic spheres, traversing the universe. I have no answer other than considering it's popularly hammered into my mind as my childhood fantasies. As I later contemplated, that probably was my personal and natural automatic responses to childish human behavior against my person, a way of self-preservation, if you like. Why was I so very critical about the sciences, no matter how advanced they were? And they could not answer my questions. I asked over and over and still had the same dilemma, although I preferred always to think very scientifically, without following any religion, cult, or belief systems. When introduced to any Bible bashers, I asked them also similar questions, without any explanation they could provide me with. I was introduced to some cultist groups of people. I went along with them, especially after my beloved wife was so completely absorbed into one, and I was to discover what they truly believed in, but I couldn't fully accept them and their teachings as they were really wanting. And when I have been discovered not accepting their teachings, they immediately disfellowshipped me and shunned me and destroyed my beloved family, same as with every other connection all around the world. They were acting according to their Christian principles, lovingly as apparently learned from Jesus the Christ. I wonder. They also told me many lies behind me and painted me as black as far as they could. I was truly an odd number out, and that is how I remained for many, many years. I have also, as I believed, encountered, indeed, space-originated people and their vehicles of travel or vehicles of flight, whichever way you may prefer to consider them. Yet, whatever I have attempted to speak, whenever I did so, of has been considered as hallucination or just imagination. Therefore, even when I wrote my autobiography, I had no choice but present it as in a fantasy style. And it will continue. I am not proposing that what I have experienced was only my personal physical experiences, but people who identifying themselves as such and proving themselves seemingly legit also belong to that category. However, what we discover is indeed quite interesting. For instance, when we ask questions like, were there other civilizations before humanity on planet Earth? Personally, I am unsure. Based on current scientific understanding and evidence so far, there is no conclusive proof of civilizations existing on Earth before humans. In here, the term civilization typically refers to complex societies with characteristics like cities, writing systems, and organized governance, all of which are hallmarks of human societies as we are told and as written. To repeat, civilization is defined by a complex social structure and technological advancements, including things like cities, townships, writing, and organized governance. These are all human traits, and so, by definition, there could not be any civilization without humans. That is only so as far as the human civilization is concerned in the world, as we have no knowledge about other civilizations originating from elsewhere. One other dilemma we face is the lack of evidence. Despite some theories and several speculations, there is no substantial archaeological or geological evidence to support the existence of pre-human civilizations on Earth. While some scientists have explored the possibility of detecting the long-term impact of past civilizations in the geological record, such as the Silurian hypotheses, the current consensus is showing that we have not found any evidence of it. That is the scientist's view. What about any alternative explanations? Some might point to the existence of other intelligent species in the past, but this does not necessarily equate to a civilization. Theoretically, even if other intelligent species existed, they may not have developed the same complex social structures as we did, and technologies that define the human civilizations as on Earth. The Anthropocene. The current geological epoch, the Anthropocene, is characterized by the significant impact of humans on the planet Earth, including climate change, as we read and been told. This raises the questions about how we might recognize the signs of positive civilizations, even if they have existed at all. Let us now focus on human history for a moment. Remember, the majority of historical and archaeological research focuses on the development and evolution of human societies and their impact on the planet Earth. While the possibility of pre-human civilizations remains a topic of discussion and much speculation, the lack of concrete evidence supports the view that humans were the first to develop the complex social structures and technologies which define civilization. Scientific American magazine had a very interesting article in regard to pre-human civilization which may have existed on Earth long before ours. One of the creepier conclusions drawn by scientists studying the Anthropocene, the proposed study of Earth's geological history in which humankind's activities dominate the globe, is how closely today's industrial system induced climate change resembles the conditions seen in the past periods of rapid temperature rise. As we can also read, these hypothermal, the thermal maximum events of prehistoric times. How did this started? According to research indicates, like Gavin Schmidt, climate modeler and director of the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies, what are the signs of warming was caused by humans or by natural forces? The fingerprints, the chemical signals and tracers that give evidence of what happened then should look very similar. The canonical example of a hypothermal is the Paleocene Eocene thermal maximum, or PETM, a 200,000 year period that occurred some 55.5 million years ago, when global average temperatures rose by 5 to 8 Celsius degrees. Schmidt has pondered the PETM for his entire career, and it was on his mind one day in 2017 in Rochester. Astrophysicist Adam Frank paid him a visit. Then they debated a while, considering a couple of questions. There were subsequent attempts to address both questions yielded a provocative paper on the possibility that Earth might have posed more than one technological society during its 4.5 billion year history. And if indeed some such culture arose on Earth in the murky depths of geological time, how much the scientists can today discern the signs of that incredible development? Or, as they put it in the paper, if an industrial civilization had existed on Earth many millions of years prior to our own era, what traces would it have left, and would they be detectable today? Good question. Schmidt and Frank began to forecasting the geological fingerprints. The Anthropocene is likely to leave behind such as hints of soaring temperatures and rising seas laid down in beds of sedimentary rock. These features, they noted, are very similar to the geological leftovers of the PETM and other hypothermal events. They then considered what test could closely distinguish an industrial cause from otherwise naturally occurring climate changes. These issues have never really been addressed to any great extent. Schmidt notes, and that goes not only for scientists, but evidently for science fiction writers as well. He adds, I look back into the science fiction literature to try to find the earliest example of a story featuring a non-human industrial civilization on Earth. The earliest I could find was in a Doctor Who episode. After a couple of million years, Frank says, the chances are that any physical reminder of your civilization has vanished. So you have to search for things like sedimentary and isotopic ratios that took off the shadows of many pre-human civilizations could, in principle, lurk hidden in such subtleties. Next, of course, comes the issue of longevity. The longer existing civilizations' energy intensive period persists, that the more its demands increase, the more its presence should become in the geological record. Now consider our own industrial age, which has existed for only about 300 years out of a multi-million year history of humanity on Earth. And now compare that minuscule slice of time with a 500,000 years or so the humans have lived on land. Humanity's present rapacious phase of fossil fuel use and environmental degradation, Frank says, is unsustainable for long periods. In time, it will diminish by human choice or by the force of nature. Maybe civilizations like ours have happened multiple times. But if they each only lasted 300 years, no one would ever see them, Frank says. Can there be any signs of civilization? Question. Finding signs of an altered carbon cycle would be one big clue to previous industrial periods, Schmidt says. Since the mid-18th century, humans have released 500 million tons of fossil carbon at high rates. Such changes are detectable in changes in the carbon isotope ratio between biological and inorganic carbon, that is, between the carbon incorporated into things like seashells and that which goes instead into lifeless volcanic rock. Another tracer would be the distinctive patterns of sediment deposition. Telltale traces of nitrogen in the sediments could suggest the widespread use of fertilizers, fingering industrial scale agriculture as a possible culprit, and metal levels in the sediments might instead point to runoff from manufacturing and other heavy industry. Specific tracers would be non-naturally occurring. Synthetic molecules such as steroids and many plastics, along with well-known pollutants, including polychlorinated by toxic chemical compounds, electrical devices, and chlorocarbons, ozone-eating molecules from refrigerators and aerosol sprays. The key strategy in distinguishing the presence of industry from nature, Schmidt notes, is developing a multi-factor signature. It is also to acknowledge that the potential for this work can be misinterpreted. No matter what, this is going to be interpreted as the astronomers say, Silurians might have existed even though there is no such evidence, it is said. Then again, a sense of evidence is not evidence of absence. Corey, as Powell contributes, our Milky Way galaxy contains tens of billions or potentially habitable planets, but we have no idea whether we are alone. For now, Earth is the only world known to harbor life. And among all the living things on our planet, we assume Homo sapiens being the only species ever to have developed advanced technology. But maybe That is assuming too much. In a mind-bending newspaper entitled The Solarian Hypothesis, a reference to an ancient race of brainy reptiles featured in the British science fiction show Doctor Who, scientists at NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies and the University of Rochester take a critical look at the scientific evidence that ours is the only advanced civilization so far ever to have existed on our planet. Do we really know? Were we the first technological species on Earth? Asks Adam Frank, a professor of physics and astronomy at Rochester. If humans went extinct today, Frank says, any future civilization that might arise on Earth millions of years hence might find it hard to recognize traces of human civilization. By the same token, if some earlier civilization existed on Earth millions of years ago, we might have trouble finding evidence of it with our technologies so far. In search of lizard people. The discovery of physical artifacts would certainly be the most dramatic evidence of a Silurian-style civilization on Earth. But Frank doubts we will ever find anything of the sort. Our cities cover less than 1% of the surface, he says. Any comparable cities from an earlier civilization would be easy for modern-day paleontologists to miss, and no one should count on finding a Jurassic iPhone. It would not last millions of years, like Gorilla Glass. Finding fossilized bones is a slightly better bet. But if another advanced species walked the planet Earth millions of years ago, that is, if they walked at all, it would be easy to overlook their fossilized skeletons. If they had skeletons. Modern humans have been around for just 100,000 years. A thin sliver of time within the vast and spotty fossil record. Using human technologies as their guide, Schmidt and Frank suggested zeroing in on plastics and other long-lived synthetic molecules as well as radioactive fallout in case of factions of ancient lizard people raised atomic warfare. In our case, technological development has been accompanied by widespread extinctions and rapid environmental changes. So, those are red flags as well. However, we cannot ignore the fact that the universe we know of has been in existence much longer than the solar system, let alone the wonderful planet we occupy. Therefore, we are unable to even consider that the planet we occupy has never been occupied before. We need to be bold enough to say we don't know. Even when thinking in the format of science fiction, there is no doubt in my mind that we may have had a different life and occupying civilization for centuries before a human existence took place. Does that mean that we have to search into the human mind to discover more about what may have been, or shall we conduct a research? Perhaps finding a way of signature and evidence of former lives through our DNA modifications or programming. Maybe. That is to consider for our scientists and for our new discoveries. Therefore, it is much better once again to give it a 50-50 chance that things may have been not the way we assume, but the way we don't know. Again, my suggestion would perhaps be the best way to follow without hallucinating, but giving some credit to our imaginative minds. So, welcome to science fiction. And remember, there have been pilots in the past in the South Pole going into an opening and finding themselves in places of beauty. There are some evidential writings about it. I will leave it with you for the moment. Thank you for sharing and listening. We will meet you again by the next episode. Until then, be happy. Thank you.